So let's move on to how do you avoid those big damages? How do you avoid breaking the law? How do you avoid infringement? And that leads to the big question, what if I have infringed already, or better, how do I avoid infringing? Well, there are certain exceptions and certain limitations on claims of infringement. The first is there's a limited religious service exception. And this is found under the Copyright Act, 17 U.S.C. 110(3), which states, the following are not infringements of copyright: performance of a non-dramatic literary or musical work, or of a musical work, or of a religious nature, or a display of a work in the course of services at a place of worship or other religious assembly. Now, one might read that initially to say, well, that means I can copy whatever I want as long as there's a religious purpose to it. Or if it deals with my church, I can copy whatever I want. And that's just not accurate. We have to break down the language of the statute. So it refers to non-dramatic literary or musical work of a dramatico-musical work of religious nature. What is that? That covers oratios, cantatas, musical settings of services, choral services. It does not cover secular operas. So if you wanted to do Jesus Christ Superstar, Phantom of the Opera, any number of other musicals or plays or so forth, you couldn't do this. One very good example of this is many churches show scenes from, I believe it was, there's a movie about the life of Jesus. I can't remember the name of it, but they often set it to a Foreigner song. Many people have seen that. I Want to Know What Love Is, that song, and they'll set it to the crucifixion. And I've seen that at a number of church services. That kind of thing would not be covered under this. It also deals with a performance. And so what is a performance? It surely applies only to a performance. It doesn't apply to covering or playing pre-recorded music. So performance is live, right? It's where you are, it's doing that performance real time. It also is limited to, it must be in the course of services at a place of worship or other religious assembly. So what is in the course of services or other religious assembly? Well, it doesn't apply to a social, an educational, a fundraising, or an entertainment purpose. It truly is the service itself. And so if we are playing music or a movie, or we are putting on a performance at a church social afterwards, or we're doing religious education outside the service setting, or we're fundraising, or we're merely getting together for camaraderie, for entertainment purposes, that's not covered under this exception. And very significantly, it doesn't extend to religious broadcasts, radio, podcasts, cable, or other transmission, even if it's sent from the place of worship. So if I am broadcasting my services live so that people can see them in their home, that's not covered under the religious services exception. If I decide to record those services so I can see them at a later time, that's not covered under a religious services exception. If I have the greatest sermon of all time and it's recorded on everyone's iPhone while the service is going on, and I decide to rebroadcast that and it includes someone else's copyrighted work, it's not excluded.
Do you have a recommendation about how to do some of those broadcasts so that you don't have this problem of infringement? For example, if I have the choir singing from music that I don't have a right to broadcast, but I maybe have a right to read and perform in my service. Do you have a recommendation of I should just do the sermon that I'm going to on my podcast or on my live broadcast and not do the other aspects of the service? Or
Sure, there's a couple areas to look. The first is to look when you purchase music for your church and for your choir in particular, to look at the rights that you're getting in the contract. And oftentimes you can acquire additional rights, maybe for a little additional fee, when you buy the sheet music itself and the rights to perform that. And that might give you some protection. Another way to do it is to be very judicious about what you're putting out there for people to see. You have to really think ahead of time. This may be a great prop for my sermon. This may be really moving, But if it is not something that is excluded from copyright or something that you know you have rights to, it's something you should look to avoid. So in looking at this, you really want to take some careful preparation, which is not always easy in our day and time.
Yeah, how would I find that in a contract or whenever I'm asking for a license? Where would I find that language that tells me my rights?
If you're buying music online these days, it's generally pretty easy. It talks about the rights, and you're actually checking boxes to see what you're buying. And so you'll check one box for the sheet music. You'll say you want rights to rebroadcast, and it'll give you an extended license. So that's a good way to look there. And we'll talk about some of these sources that you can look for, and we can get free content. And this is a big question, and again, it has its own slide for a simple reason. And that is because just because you find it on the internet doesn't mean it's in the public domain. I hear people on an almost daily basis ask me, well, I don't understand why I got a cease and desist letter. I don't understand why I can't use this. It was on the internet. I just cut and pasted it, right? It's very, very simple. I took it from Google Images, or I took it from my favorite website, or any number of places. But it's important to note that simply because a picture or video is available on the internet does not make copying from a website fair use. And I think this is a really easy concept to understand when you put it in the context of music. We all know that going online and downloading music from a Napster, a BearShare, from any of those is illegal, and sometimes they'll come after you and you should pay for music. Music, under the Copyright Act, and pictures and video are the exact same thing. They're treated exactly the same. They're all works, and they're all subject to the same rights. So just as you wouldn't steal music, you wouldn't steal an image or a video from a website, or just a Google search or any other place like that. And I know this picture here probably reflects how many of you are feeling right now, and this is a common reaction. And for the record, I did pay for this video, or pay for this picture, to put it on there. So again, it bears reiterating for perhaps a fourth time. Simply because the picture or video is available on the internet does not make copying from a website fair use.
Can you tell me just really quickly, what does fair use mean?
Sure. Fair use, that's very good timing. Fair use weighs a variety of factors. Fair use, generally speaking, deals with the ability to use a work, even if it's copyrighted, in a smaller than whole portion for certain acceptable uses. Some of those acceptable uses may be for educational purposes and so forth. Courts have looked at four primary factors. The first is the purpose and character of the use, including whether the use is of a commercial nature or is for a nonprofit educational purpose. So if I use a picture and I'm paid to give a presentation, which today I'm not, if you were paid to give a presentation and you included a picture that you found on the internet, that's more likely than not going to be a fair use. If I take a picture and I use it for an educational purpose to show what penguins look like in Antarctica, and I'm teaching a class in Antarctica, that would be a nonprofit educational purpose. You also look at the nature of the copyrighted work. Is it a poem? Is it a music? Is it musical work? Is it a book? Is it an answer key? Those type of things. You're looking at the nature of work. And then you look at the amount and substantiality of the portion used in relation to the copyrighted work as a whole. And this really is a necessity type analysis. Is it necessary for me to copy the entirety of War and Peace if I simply want to show my class one page of War and Peace or one paragraph of War and Peace? If I want to give a poem or use a poem, is it really necessary for me to copy the entire 10 stanzas of the poem versus 3 lines of the poem? And then the final factor is the effect of the use upon the potential market for value of the copyrighted use. If I copy the entirety of War and Peace and hand it out, that's really going to impact the value of the book or the potential to sell that book. If I give out the most important 4 lines of a poem and publish those on the website and on my hymnals and in my bulletins at the end of church, that may have an impact on the overall value of the poem itself.
So, Sam, I see on the first line it says, including whether the use is for commercial or not. And if I'm thinking of from a church perspective, I would say like it's a nonprofit setting, it's not for commercial use, and if I'm trying to promote religion, I would say that it was for an educational purpose. How would you weigh that?
Well, generally, we look first at how the organization is set up, right? These are all nonprofits. Mm-hmm. So that's the first step of the analysis. And that might carry the day, frankly. Now, if you're trying to make money at a bake sale by selling copyrighted works, that might be a nonprofit / commercial type work, right? That's the nature of the work is what you're trying to do. Why are you trying to use it? What is the purpose for it?
Now, but if I'm copying, for example, a whole picture, would that be more problematic because I have a hard time saying it's for educational purposes and I'm only using a limited amount when I'm just taking someone's full picture as opposed to one line from a movie or something?
Well, let's use this gentleman's picture here.
Yeah.
All right, so if we were to use the entirety of this picture, I don't think that we, or as a church, would be selling the picture, right? You're not going to take this picture, frame it, and sell it. His mother might, but you're not going to do that. So if you're not selling it, that takes away one aspect of it. If you're using it to examine someone's eyes, it might be necessary only to copy a portion of his eyes and take the half of that. But if you're using it to examine how someone might feel experiencing shock or grief or awe, you need the entirety of the picture. And so that would be a good example of using the entirety of the picture.
And do you think that would fall within the exception or outside of the exception?
I think if you were using it for educational purposes on a limited basis to show shock, awe, that might be something.
So you said one of those words was key, I think, limited basis.
Correct, limited.
So I couldn't like post this on my website when I'm talking about shock.
No, you wouldn't want to use this to advertise a trauma support group or to advertise to all your parishioners, we're going to have the world's greatest bake, or guess what? And then show this guy's picture and say, we're having the world's greatest bake sale on your website. You wouldn't be able to do that. That wouldn't be an educational purpose. It wouldn't be limited in nature. It's out there for everyone.
So just like my sermons that I give and I post online, they're out there forever. So I need to be really careful about what's included in those.
Correct.
Thank you.
Now, we did mention a little bit that there are some fair use exceptions that provide limited protection for educators. And there is a whole host of these. They're available online. There's an organization that puts out the various limitations on this. There are limitations and portions for books. There's limitations for periodicals. There's limitations for poems that are less than 250 words, for more than 250 words, for illustrations, for special works. We're not going to go through all of those in their entirety because that's a whole nother hour. But it's good to know that those are out there. And they invariably fall along the lines of use only that is necessary and nothing more. And to allow that use to be for a limited period of time. A couple of areas that you might commonly experience are music. And music cannot be reproduced but for very limited circumstances. Those include emergency purposes, right? You've already purchased the music is not available, and you have an imminent performance, those types of things. If you are making certain copies of the excerpts for education and teaching purposes, that may be permitted. For videos, which is a common area that we hear, should I be able to play a video in my classroom? We've mentioned that a couple of times. Or should I be able to post a video or a portion of the video that I copied from my favorite movie? Maybe it's applicable for a teaching purpose and place it on the internet. The answer to that generally is no, but you can use it so long as it is for a limited purpose used in the classroom and it is in a place that is similar to it, or it's in a place that's similar to a classroom and it's being used for teaching purposes. That's what that really means, for instruction under the direction of a teacher. You're really using it for teaching purposes. And again, it has to be in that physical location is an important part of that, whether it's a classroom or a similar place devoted to instruction. I haven't seen any cases or guidance on whether a virtual classroom would be permitted, and I would think it would not. And then the other thing that you often see are media presentations or multimedia presentations. There's certain things that you can do to make sure you're within the guidelines there. The key is to make sure that on the opening screen that you display the copyright notice and you're giving that sense of attribution to where your copyrighted works came from, that you're relying on this fair use exemption, and only reuse the presentation for a limited period of time. Where we find some trouble in the cases and under the guidance of these guidelines for teachers that create a multimedia presentation that they intend to use for 10 years. They generally try to limit it to a single year or 2 or 3 years at max, depending on the limited portion that you're using. So if you have a presentation that you're using year over year, you need to look at the fair use is shrinking, right? There's a carbon dating or a carbon factor to it where it's the right to fair use is decreasing. The simplest way to avoid infringement and to not have to rely on any of these exceptions is to avoid infringement through permission, but this requires planning. So the key solution, again, is to plan ahead. Think about what you're going to use, where you're going to obtain the works, and how you intend to use them. You can often find the publisher of a copy of a book or of music. Things have gotten a little faster with the internet and communications that way, but still for a publisher, a book or a poem, you should plan on 4 to 6 months. That may seem like a long time, but for publishers, that's still in the realm of how long it takes to get permission these days. It's often easier to go through and buy the permission than it is to go through and ask for the permission for a nonprofit use. And then finally, for images and video, you can use services such as Shutterstock. All of the images that you see today in my slides were purchased from Shutterstock. You can purchase a year-long license for $49 for 5 images. The more images that you license, the less per image it is. There's always a discount or promo code online that you can find too that'll give you 15 or 20% off. And there's a good selection of images that you can go through. There are some sites that offer them for free. One site is Pexel, P-E-X-E-L.com, P-E-X-E-L.com. There's also freestockimage.com. These sites are generally pretty good. You want to make sure that when you're looking for a site such as these, that they have some guarantee that they have permission and authorization. What you don't want to do is find a site that maybe is an illegitimate site that has simply scraped images from all over the internet and is representing to you that they are licensed when they're not. You can look at these and you can generally tell which sites are pretty good and which ones are pretty legit. And so you'll pay for either an annual license, or even if your church wants to buy a license that you use collectively, where you share that password for all your church purposes. You open an account and you can pay for unlimited number of pictures. You can pay for a certain limited number of pictures, and that gives you an option to do it on a going forward basis.
Do you have any tips if I'm looking at one of those free sites to tell if it's legitimate or not?
Well, generally you'll see things where they have different classes, where they say if I'm going to use the photo, it's X dollars, and if I'm going to use it for commercial purposes, say on billboards for 500,000 billboards or display to 500,000 people or more, it's an increase. That actually shows that they're putting some thought into how do you use it, as opposed to someone who just says, here it is, use it. You'll see a lot of protection mechanisms. When you blow up the image, it'll have watermarking to prevent you from downloading it. The image qualities will be higher. You'll have an option in image qualities. The volume might be higher. And you'll also see that they have model releases. They generally should say they have a model release, which means for the gentleman that was in shock, he has a right to his image, and so he gave a model release to allow that company to use it. And so you'll generally find that. Or you can find guarantees. And so if you look for a reputable, Shutterstock again is a good one. Pexel, I've never used it, but I understand it to be a good one, so I'm not guaranteeing it, but that appears to be a good one as well. In the slide presentation that will be sent out to you, or at least the access, I've given you an example letter. It's a sample letter of what to send to a publisher to ask for permission. It lays out certain things to make it easy for the publisher. It's like anything, when you ask for a favor, you want to make it as easy for that person to say yes as possible. It identifies the author's name. If you've got the title, the edition, the volume of the book, you can look on the inside of the cover and see the ISBN, ISSN number, which are the kind of the registration numbers for books. You can also identify the specific pages you want to copy. If you ask to copy all of War and Peace, they're probably going to say no. If you say, I want to copy one page or one paragraph of War and Peace for use in my religious education class covering X, they're more likely to do that. You also ask for the number of copies, and if you want to give, again, the reason for it, the course name, the purpose, and so forth, and then give them an opportunity to sign it. So when you send the letter, let them simply sign it, mail them an envelope that they can mail it back to you, or submit it on email with a scan that they can do that. That makes it easier for them, and we're more likely to get better results.
Do I need to do something like this to put the lyrics of a song in my bulletin?
That's correct. So lyrics of a song, there are rights to those, both the composition rights to the overall music and the words themselves. And so that's something that you would need to do.
So if I have the rights to play the music at church, but I want to put the lyrics somewhere, that
Correct.
would be a separate right?
Correct. Right. For example, if there was a funeral,
Mm-hmm.
that's an example where people commonly put a poem or some words to music. Whether it's religious or secular, it doesn't make a difference, right? If you put Blowing in the Wind, the Joan Baez song in there, or put in Alleluia, the words there. Any of those are required to have that permission.
Thanks. And what do I do if I have already posted material that I think might be infringing? Do you have a recommendation on how to fix that?
I'd start by taking it down,
Yeah.
right? If I post it, I would take it down. Right? If I have it planned to go forward, I would stop doing it. If I can stub something out that I can get rights to and have permission to, or I already have permission to, among other things that you have a right to, whether it's music, I would sub those in. If someone confronts you about infringement, a lot of people tend to throw those in the mail or throw those in the trash. And if you throw it in the trash, that's not necessarily the best course of action, because they may come back to you, and then they may come back to you again, and eventually they may sue you. It's better to deal with those on the front end, and very often if you get a call that says it's $5,000 to settle, you can settle for a lot less than that. There's always room to maneuver in those, especially if you're reasonable on the front end and agree to take it down. But it's important to note that $5,000 is a big amount of money for a church, and so if that's something you're not planning for, that can really hit you. And even $750 might hit you at some point.
Right. Well, and what about if I've already essentially released it into the world because I sent it in an email, something like that? Would you just recommend don't do it anymore, or do you have other sort of solutions for that?
I would recommend don't do it anymore.
Yeah.
I wouldn't try to claw it back and create a big stink about it. I would try not to do it anymore.
Thanks.